Welcome to Rev Up Your Business with Hilda Gann. We are now in season 5, and we've changed the name and the focus of the podcast. Rev Up Your Business is the podcast for small to medium-sized business owners, entrepreneurs, and HR professionals. Each week, we share tips, strategies, and trends on how you can build success in your business. I share my expertise as a people-centric leader in work culture and human resources. My guests share their expertise in human resources, marketing, sales, finance, IT, leadership, and the multiple facets that you need to take care of your business. If you love to learn and want to find out how you can rev up your business, join us. Welcome to another episode of Rev Up Your Business. Today, we're going to be focusing on right-sizing your office space to support a people-first culture. I'm delighted to have my guest, Erika MacKay. Erika is a workspace wellness expert and advocates for space that helps us feel and perform at our best. She is a registered interior designer, a member of the International Well Building Standard faculty, and a part-time faculty member at Conestoga College. As founder and CEO of Niche for Design, she is focused on growing her team and their impact. She is fascinated by hybrid offices, flexible co-working environments, and the opportunity to create connection and belonging in physical office spaces. Her next business venture is going to be an embodiment of this new work experience. Now that we're in and out of COVID, things have changed for people and where they work. So I am delighted to have Erika join me today to really talk about what are we doing with the space that we have.
Thank you so much for having me, Hilda. I really appreciate being here to speak with you.
Oh, it's a delight. You and I've talked a lot over the last couple of months about the hybrid workspace, and I think we're both aligned. We want to create space that's really looking at people and the use of people. But I'm going to let you start and share some of that passion that you have for making sure workspace is optimized.
Yes, I've always been really interested in the idea of optimizing a workspace so that it is designed to really support the people and inherently the business that it is designed to support. And over the years, that's kind of led me to some affiliation with the Well Building Standard. And the Well Building Standard is all about, it's a certification system that's human focused. So it's all about how do we create spaces and inherently policy, HR, facilities, etc., that really is designed to work in tandem together and to support the occupant, to help them feel well and ultimately perform at their best. So that really aligned with my philosophy on design. And so that's really become our biggest focus area recently, and makes sense even more so with all that's changed recently in offices.
So what does that mean? I think we are all in a more hybrid kind of situation, or we're working remotely, or we're all working back in the office. We're focusing, I guess, on the hybrid, but if you want to talk about those other options of working remotely or working from the office, kind of take us through that.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of there's the wellness piece to design, and there's the purpose and intent behind designing a space with humans in mind. And then right now, part of the reason for that being so relevant is all of this change that's happening in office environments. So for example, I'll share, I recently read a statistic that 75% of US companies are planning to downsize their office spaces this year. So that's quite staggering and could be seen as a failure, potentially. They're not seeing value in the office space. But I see that really as an opportunity to rethink what is the right kind of space for an organization and really make some plans that are focused on quality of space versus quantity of space. The reality is most teams are hybrid. And if your team is not in the office every day, it's highly unlikely that you need the same kind of space or same amount of space as you did when they were in office every day. That's just logical.
I mean, we were in COVID. Coming up March, it'll be 4 years. Many companies have leases that are 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. So during that time, people might have made decisions. I know in my son's case, he moved back home in March. And then about a year or two later, when the lease was up, they basically said, you're working from home now. We don't need this office space. And he continues to do that post COVID. So some people would have made that, but a lot of people are coming up for renewal and thinking, so what do I do? Do I keep the space? And if I do, what do I do with it? Or maybe I reduce the space.
They are. And actually, funny enough, even some of the companies that did make a decision to completely leave their existing office spaces during the pandemic, or companies who were decidedly 100% remote to begin with at whatever time frame,
Mm-hmm.
they're also looking at, wait a minute, what is the purpose of us being in person in office? When does that have merit? And then from a design standpoint, that ignites the conversation of what does that look like? What kind of space do we need to support that kind of world? We know there's value to meeting in person. We've talked about this in great detail before. Connection is such an important part of employee culture. It helps to mitigate stress. It helps people to feel a sense of belonging in an organization. And we know that humans connect in a more meaningful way when they meet in person, at least some of the time. That's not to say we have to always be in person, but there is merit to that being part of the equation.
I find that, in the last year, people are starting to get back out there. And whether it's back to the office or networking sessions. And I mean, some people I have never met in person. And yet that sense of camaraderie, that sense of connection, most of us are hugging each other and probably spreading possible COVID germs. But that aside, there is something to be said about the human connection. And I think we forget. I remember when we would have board meetings, senior management meetings, and we would talk. And you got 12 people around this huge table, right? And instinctively, that Joe's going to start talking, and your body just veers towards Joe, or you sense they don't like this idea. How do I turn this around? You can feel those vibes, but on Zoom, you can't feel that 3D energy that's there. And so there is value to coming back to the office, but with a purpose. So maybe you want to share, why do I need to come back to the office? I'll share a bit of statistics. In 2021, I believe 42% of Canadians were working fully on site, and that's gone up now since COVID has been done, 49%. Remote has gone from 23% down to 13%. So people are changing and evolving. And the hybrid model gone up from 35 to 38. So very interesting statistics, but a shift towards getting back into the working world from a physically being there, seeing people perspective.
Yeah, I think this is something that's going to continue to shift as organizations kind of gradually determine what works best for them. But we are seeing less drastic shifts, like a little bit of a leveling, which indicates that some version of hybrid where we're at is probably going to remain.
Mm-hmm.
And truly, I do think hybrid is the best option for most companies. There are exceptions, of course, on both ends of that spectrum. But I think there's benefits to both depending on the kind of work that you're doing. And I think it's about each individual organization getting into some detail, engaging their team in conversations that are meaningful, and taking a deep look at how they operate and looking at what they need to be doing in office to be able to benefit from both sides, the virtual and the in-person option. I think one of the biggest things with in-person, that connection piece, as I mentioned before, is really, really critical. It's important from a retention strategy. It's important from the standpoint of employees being interested in participating in the organization. We know that people are more likely to take better care of your customers if they feel as though they're also accountable to their colleagues. And so that's really meaningful. So yeah, I think it's about understanding what those purposes are. I'll share with you one thing I've noticed personally, and I've been talking to lots of other professionals about this recently, is I've noticed that I remember people I'm meeting much more when I meet them in person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this does go back to that energy and body language transfer that you mentioned. There's people I've met online multiple times. I meet them in person and I either still don't know who they are, or it takes me longer than it should to figure out who they are. Whereas someone I've met in person, even briefly, I'm way more likely to remember them and to have a connection more quickly with them. So I think that's really interesting and just one example of how that in person is different.
I agree with you. I was at an HR event this morning, and I was manning the registration as part of my volunteer work and for our HR organization. And someone says, "Hi, Hilda, you remember me?" I remembered the face, but I couldn't remember. And she said, "We were at the HR tech conference together." And then suddenly I knew the face was familiar, but I couldn't place it. And when she said that, I was able to see her in that tech space over 4 or 5 years ago, because it was pre-COVID. And I thought, yes, it's the power of connection when you can feel the energy, see the person. And then afterwards, the session was over. I went up to her and we talked, and she said, "Yeah, it was actually twice." And she said, "Yeah, I remember that." And so we also agreed that HR needs to embrace technology. We're talking 4 or 5 years ago. And I knew that. I thought, I have to help small to medium sized businesses realize, no, we can still do Excel spreadsheets. We can do, no, we need to. And now 5 years later, it's even more that you need to embrace technology. And there's so much software out there for the small to medium sized employers too. I want to kind of share, you've been alluding to that you want to make it people first culture. And I want to share the statistics that you and I actually had a presentation, a live stream where I was your guest. And we really did talk about rightsizing to support a people centric culture. And it was a really robust discussion. And I want to share these statistics to help people. When they did the surveys by Work Human IQ, they asked people what they felt. And when you encourage, when you listen to people and you provide employee preferences, the things is you're going to have an increased sense of growth for that person. They feel like they're going to develop. They're going to not be looking for a job for 12 months. That was the question. Do you think you're going to be looking for a job for 12 months? And do you feel connected to your organization? Those people that, whatever their preference was, hybrid, remote, or whatever, they had a boon on those people that felt you've got to come back to the office 100% of the time. I don't care what you're thinking. 1.6 to 1.7 times those that felt they had no preference. And then the ability to get the job done, the tasks at hand, productivity, 1.2 times those people that were told this is the situation under which you are going to work. So employee preference, having a say, listening to them and getting some sense of, okay, I get this, I'm in this decision. That's going to make a difference.
Oh, absolutely. That's huge. And that's always the first conversation we have with new clients is about the value in engaging their team in the early process of developing an understanding of what they really need. I think sometimes business leaders are a little bit nervous to ask for input, particularly when it comes to the space, because there's kind of a preconception that people are going to just ask for all these things that are really expensive and they won't be able to fulfill it. And so that wouldn't be great. But in reality, what ends up happening is people feel like they're part of the process, which is they're appreciating that.
Yes.
People like to have choice. And we end up finding out a lot of things about what's most important to the team and what they really need to function properly in the space that actually ends up saving you money in most cases because you're not guessing about what's going to be most valuable.
Yep. And then the examples I gave, imagine a person who feels they got a career here, so they're going to stay longer. So that turnover is going to save you money. The fact that they aren't going to look for a whole year because they feel I got it good here saves you money.
Yes.
The fact that you actually get your tasks done even better, it all makes sense. Now, when we were talking before, we talked about don't make people come into work just because they need to come into work. It's purpose. You talked about purpose. And sometimes making sure that the workspace is utilized appropriate to the need. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's a broad question because it really does depend on the organization. But some of the things that we see often is understanding, most of the time people are coming in purposefully, it's because they have meetings with their team. So let's create spaces that support those meetings and not worry about everybody having a workstation necessarily.
Mhm.
Or that's a really common one. Often it's training. That's another reason. We've seen a lot of companies where almost the only reason they really need an office is for training space. And that's great. So that's what your office is. It's a place for training and for connection, maybe some hot desks for people that are kind of in and out and need a place to sit and do a little bit of work. Like sometimes that's the solution. And I think really the important takeaway is to be open to other scenarios. Like you need a space for your team to connect and do some sort of work. Let's be open to discovering what that really means and then creating a space around that. So that's kind of the functional piece of it. And then of course there is the wellness piece of it too. Like how do you really communicate that this space is designed for you, my team? And
Mhm.
then there's aspects that go into that as well.
Yeah, because I think you talk about certain people love to work in spaces where there's a bit of socialization, and other people need some privacy. How do you handle that as a space designer? What suggestions do you have for us to be thinking about when we're doing that?
Yeah, great question. So in some cases, it can be role specific. So you can kind of design different ways for different departments based on the work that they're doing and what sort of separation from distraction is needed. But truly, distraction is a very common challenge for most people. Either acoustical distraction, that's a very common one. Visual distraction is another one. Are you forced to be sitting in a position where you're watching people walk by all day? Because that can be really distracting. Smell is actually another one that people complain about.
Oh yes, the
And
kitchen and
yeah,
people bringing
yes,
in their favorite foods, which may have quite a bit of a scent to it.
for sure. People don't think about that. And there are ways that you can be mindful from a space planning standpoint to mitigate that a little bit. And temperature is another one too. One of the solutions for the temperature piece sometimes, and this goes back to choice, giving people the option of where to sit. Companies that choose a free address model, meaning that people don't have dedicated desk. There's lots of good things about that, and it is appropriate for certain companies. One of which is people have choice. This spot is too drafty. Well, I can sit over here instead. This
Yeah.
spot is too loud. Well, I can sit over in this spot instead. And in tandem with that, we often will look at zoning in those kinds of an office spaces. And even some offices that are kind of partially free address, partial dedicated desks, we can look at zoning areas that are intended to be more lively community feel, and then other spaces that are intended to be more quiet and designated as such, almost like a library of sorts,
Yeah.
or phone booths is another one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. I was recalling kind of when we were looking for a downtown office. I toured a whole bunch of places, and I had got the opportunity to go to some LEED buildings, and it was just amazing because the ventilation always can be a problem, and it's blowing right at your desk, right on top of you. And in this LEED building, everything was below. So you don't even, the repair people don't even need a ladder to change things. And the heat was coming from below, and there was a vent that you could aim it in the direction away from you or towards you if you wanted more heat or air conditioning in the summertime. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. And it's like right there, and I can use it if I want to. And I think, well, that really gives flexibility, and enjoyment. I want to talk too about different kind of multiple spaces where people can meet. There's the traditional table and chairs around the things, but for some, maybe it's a creative company, and they need to be having creative workspaces. Tell us about some of those tips and layouts that you create for those kinds of organizations, or those kinds of organizations that need some space where this is the creative energy center.
Yeah, and truth be told, I think most organizations are and need to be able to accommodate that kind of creative collaboration in some capacity. There's always instances where you're needing to think that way in order to be successful in business. So I think there's opportunities at various levels to create spaces to accommodate that. The question often comes down to level of privacy that's required. Is this meeting room designed for completely private conversations? Are you having like an HR discussion that's a little bit private, or is it something that if somebody happens to walk by and hear a word or two, that factors into it?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then besides that, it becomes the elements of the room. So are you looking at the room needs to be fully enclosed and we're going to have whiteboards in there, or technology that enables collaboration? Going back to the hybrid situation, if you want to call it that, it's amazing really what's available now for businesses in terms of creating equitable meeting opportunities. So if you have a team that's like partially hybrid and partially in person, there's technology available now to really make that a lot more seamless. So people who aren't there in person, even though they're not benefiting from some of the energetic stuff that's going on, they're still able to participate in a more equal way. So that's something we look at. We look at there's so many products out there now too. There's different kinds of furniture divider systems we can use to kind of zone areas. Some are more casual, like lounge type collaborative areas. And going back to the choice piece, often it's about being in an environment where you have some opportunity. Even training spaces, we
mhm,
more often consider how do we not only provide enough seats for everyone, but ideally, how do we make it lay out in such a way that if people feel more comfortable standing, they can also stand and have that not be
yeah.
awkward.
Lots of considerations, and as a space designer, you help us open our eyes to those possibilities. I remember as we renovated our offices, and I remember telling you, I said I was looking for a job after we sold our company and thinking, where do I want to go? And I decided to count the number of leases that my husband and I had over the years as we grew across Canada. 23 leases, right? So I got pretty good at figuring out what to do and listening to space designers saying, we can knock a wall here, but make that sliding. We can have this kind of furniture to make this a multi-purpose room. You can do training, then you can have parties here. So, it really opened my eyes and my respect for the work that you do to help us optimize our spaces. I do want to share one statistic that I think my listeners and viewers may find interesting. During COVID, we were all thinking, okay, someday people are going to go back to work. We're all happy now with this remote situation. We can do things for our family and our loved ones that need us during the day. And then thinking about those people who were isolated, people who lived on the top floor of a building, who had no balcony, and they never saw anybody for months except when they went down to get groceries, or we're even going out to eat, right? So it was a very isolating world. And oftentimes the introverted people say, oh, great, I don't have to go back to work. I don't have to talk to people. I'm happy. I'm going to be in remote. But they did a survey about a year and a half, 2 years into COVID. And they found that even the introverted people wanted to come back to work, ideally maybe 2 days, maybe 3 at the most. And what was shared in this article was they don't want to come back and socialize and be at the water cooler type thing, but they want it in their own terms. When I want to go out for coffee and say hi to people, or see a smiling face, or talk to one of my close friends, I can do that. But then I can go back into that office. So it opened my eyes to thinking it wasn't the introverts that say, no, I never want to go back to work. We all want to have some kind of human connection that is meaningful to us.
Yeah, the need for connection is a human, like scientifically proven human need over and over, and it is not an exclusive need to extroverts. Absolutely, introverts need connection too in a different way. And this again comes back to
Exactly.
choice and why
Mhm.
having different kinds of spaces that can help people to connect while also giving them spaces that allow them to pull back a little bit and have some privacy is absolutely important.
And I think that just reinforced that, yes, right size and support people, a people first culture, but it's not a one size fits all. You're not going to go in and cookie cutter this company and then go into the next company. It's going to be almost a template of the other. No, it's listening to the needs. And I think the other thing we talked about when we were doing our live stream is, when do you bring people in? Is it 2 days a week? Is it 3 days a week? Which 2 to 3 days, and why? So do you want to elaborate on that kind of logistics a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. And again, which is why sometimes it's hard to answer these questions, is it is so specific to each organization. But what I've seen interestingly, is that a lot of companies have found it aligns very closely with like the 80-20 rule. If anyone's heard of the Pareto principle, it seems like around 20% of the time seems to be the sweet spot. And even companies who are decidedly full remote, they are actually taking that information and they're choosing to bring their teams together in person, sometimes from all over the world, for about 20% of the time, to give them the opportunity to connect. So that seems to be a sweet spot. I think going back to the involving your team in the process of determining that is really important, and understanding that it might not be a one size fits all solution individually, but especially departmentally. You don't necessarily have to have every single member of your entire team, depending on the size, in office at the same time all the time. Maybe it makes more sense for your marketing team to be in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but your IT team does need to be there every day, et cetera. And you can only really figure out the best scenario through having those dialogues with your team.
And sometimes there's cross teams, like IT and finance may really need to meet frequently, especially if they're implementing some kind of software that impacts on both of them. So it makes sense for them to come in on the same day and dedicate that day or half day to whatever. So there are lots of permutations and combinations. I want to make sure we discuss the return on investment. And I think from an employee perspective, I've shared some of those benefits. When you think about what's going to be used and how do you make sure the staff feel that they've been involved, they feel that they've been heard, because statistically it's going to help you. It's going to help you on a return on investment of your employee retention and their engagement and their happiness and satisfaction. But there's also this business aspect of rent and what happens to people when it's hybrid and they want to look at options. So Erika, share with those who are thinking, maybe I don't need this much space. What do I do?
Yeah, I think there is a very much valid quality over quantity conversation for a lot of businesses. That's kind of what it comes down to. And there's been a lot of change in the language that facilities people are utilizing when it comes to quantifying the cost of space and the cost of team members in relation to that. One of the things we're seeing a lot is that we're looking at cost per visit. So if your team is hybrid and they're only in the office 1, 2, 3 days a week, based on a percentage, then that individual being a percentage of your overall facilities cost for the year, what is the cost per visit? And for most companies, it's double or more what they were paying per visit per employee previously.
Because they're coming in less.
They're coming in less, right? Not complicated math there. And so what we're finding is if companies are open to really doing a deep dive on how they're functioning, what they really need, and in most cases, downsizing their space is appropriate as long as it's done in a way that's strategic and really mindful of the needs and purposeful to the needs of their actual team, they can have less space, get their cost per visit back down to the same or closer or maybe even better than it was pre-pandemic. So that's a really meaningful thing to be looking at for companies. And certainly this is not to discount the fact that there are of course costs to moving. Typically, if you're doing a little bit of renovations, there's going to be costs to that of all kinds of varying degrees. So it's a calculation that each company needs to do, but there are definite savings available for a lot of companies that can kind of work out.
I love that change in language, and thanks for sharing that, because it is now, you say cost per visit versus people used to use cost per square foot. Oh, you got 20 people. Well, are you multiplying it by 150 per person or whatever? And that was a mathematical formula that included making sure you had kitchen space and bathrooms and it's so many spaces for the general staff, and then larger spaces for the senior staff and meeting spaces. Yeah. So actually that doesn't make sense anymore, because the way you use space isn't going to be calculated in the same way to get that cost per square foot is right or not right. So, yeah.
Well, the square feet per person I mean, that was always a little bit questionable, honestly, because every individual needs a different kind of space depending on their role. But even more so now, like to figure out what you need for office using your number of people times by a square foot, like that tells you nothing, in my opinion, professionally speaking.
That just makes me laugh because when my husband and I had iTrans Consulting, we were growing and growing and growing. And we were in a space where we couldn't find space within in our footprint because one of the banks had this whole floor. We were willing, they left. It was a call center. We wanted to purchase it, but we couldn't because they couldn't be bothered managing the rental space. They did. I said, all you have to do is sign this lease. We'll take it over from you. And I was really frustrated with and I told the real estate agent, and he said, well, Hilda, they've written it off. What's $150,000 to them? They've already written it off. It's not going to help them. They're not going to get any extra bonus if they now sublet it to somebody. So we kept growing in this tiny space, and we had to keep adding people. And we would literally go with a measuring tape to see how much more we could reduce a person's workspace. And I remember one person said, no more, don't. I said, I know, we just only want a couple of inches now. That's all. We're not taking feet anymore. We're taking inches.
Yeah,
and I felt bad for them, but we were just caught. We knew we were going to expand, but we had to wait till 4 more months to get the space. And we ended up converting our boardroom to 7 office spaces because we just ran out of space.
More often than not, that was the catalyst for a lot of the calls we got pre-pandemic was, where do I fit these people? And that still happens occasionally, but way less. Now it's a lot more of, how do we make it so people want to be here? Or do I bother? And what does that look like?
How do we, okay, you talked about hoteling space. So now we look at space, we utilize space, we think about how we're going to use it in its multiple ways. And that because everybody's not there, you may not have your usual place that you go and the usual size. How do you help companies handle that kind of some of the staff who might get upset as a result of not having some space they can call their own, that for some people that's important, they don't like this nomadic uncertainty. So what support do you suggest for us that need that?
Yes. That's a common question. And this isn't always the right solution. There's variations of this. Are we full free address and everyone's a nomad? Is it a situation where you just have shared desks, or maybe you do have your own space, you just also share it with someone else if you're not there every week? But yeah, so change can be hard for people. Some people are going to embrace it more than others. Mm-hmm. What I found to be the key to having these kinds of changes be well received is getting people involved in the conversation early on so they feel heard and that they can contribute to determining the solution. And the other piece is making sure that what you're doing as a whole, that they can see that this is one change, but this change is also the catalyst to a lot of other things that you are going to see as very positive. Things like, we're moving to a space with a lot more natural light. So it's smaller and you will share your desks, but look at all the other benefits. We're going to be incorporating restorative spaces and more collaborative spaces based on the feedback that you've given in our earlier programming session. So it's really conveying that is a small piece of the bigger improvement that you're proposing and making sure that that's conversation.
It's always communication, inclusion, and framing. When you frame something in a positive, here's all the benefits. You're going to hotel, but guess what? The hoteling space is right in front of this huge picture window. So you're always going to see whatever the weather is that day, sunny or the storm's coming, everybody go home now, kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, it needs to be holistic. It's a piece of the equation always.
Anything else you want to share before we kind of wrap it up?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that I'm this is something we talk about all the time, and wellness in the workspace, and certainly the importance of designing spaces for people is something that has always resonated with me very strongly. And so I just find that this is a really interesting time to be involved in this kind of design. So we're excited to be able to share this with more people and to kind of teach as much as guide our clients in what's possible for their space and for their teams. So yeah, we're even looking at maybe creating a new showroom space this year that will kind of showcase some of these
Oh,
opportunities to
nice.
help people visualize what's actually possible, because it is sometimes different and different than what we're used to seeing.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots to be excited about for sure.
It's cool. And I know we alluded to the fact that you and I did a live stream on your for your company, and I was glad to really be a part of it. And today we really just capsulated it. But I guess if people want to see that, we're going to put it here on our podcast. But if you, for those of you who are listening, if you go and look up Erika MacKay on LinkedIn, check out her post. It will be there. And then you can see and listen to the full podcast. How do people get a hold of you, Erika?
Yeah, if anyone would like to get in touch with us, there's no obligation. We book discovery calls to start any of our process just to get a sense of whether it's a good fit and how we might be able to help them early on in determining their needs or implementing that vision. And the best way to contact us is always by visiting our website and booking a call or sending an inquiry from there. It's niche4design.com.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining me today, Erika. A pleasure. I think those of people who are looking or needing to look, you got a lot of tips and strategies, and make sure you include your employees in this decision making.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me, Hilda. I really appreciate it.
Well, it was nice. It was like carrying on with our conversation and our passion of making spaces where people feel well, feel inclusive, and feel like they really are working in a place that they want to work in. So thank you very much for joining me. And then to our listeners and our viewers, thank you very much for taking the time. I know you've got a lot of nuggets on how to make your workspace much more enjoyable, functional for your organization and for your employees. If you like this, give it a thumbs up, put a comment in the section below, and subscribe. There are so many different topics and guests that I have that will help you rev up your business, whether you're an entrepreneur, a business organization, or the human resources professional helping make it a better place. Thank you for tuning in to Rev Up Your Business with Hilda Gann. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast on YouTube and Spotify to stay up to date with all of our latest episodes. For more HR tips, strategies, and to learn how you can create a people-centric workplace, visit our website at peoplebrightconsulting.com.